and today we're looking at Wi-Fi security testing with Kali Linux. My name is Tom Carpenter. I'm the CTO and Head of Product Development here at CWNP. Today we're going to be looking at the different tools that we can use within Kali Linux in order to understand security issues related to Wi-Fi. Now, of course, this is directly related to our CWSP certification and also our CWNA certification. Though we do not test on Kali Linux itself on any of our exams, it is an excellent tool to actually use to understand the security issues surrounding Wi-Fi. So we'll do really two things today. We'll talk about Kali Linux and what it can offer us, and then we'll take a look at some of these tools for different scenarios and how we might use it as a testing platform. So the first thing is the different certifications that we offer, and that is the business that we're in, certifying the knowledge and skill set of individuals in relation to Wi-Fi technologies. And so we have certifications that start from the entry level with CWTS, where the focus is on getting those fundamental skills of how wireless networks work and the features that they offer, really aimed at beginning technologists or sales professionals in the Wi-Fi space. And then CWNA is our entry level to the enterprise certifications. So it certifies that you know what you need to know to be an effective administrator of wireless networks in larger deployments. And then the three professional level, DP, SP, and AP certifications really narrow down into specific areas of design, security, and troubleshooting. And of course, the elite status is the CWNE, which is the Certified Wireless Network Expert. This is an individual who has passed the 4 exams, CWNA, DP, SP, and AP, and then also submits an application to the Board of Advisors for review and approval to become a CWNE. And there are currently 148 of these CWNEs in the world. We have the CWNP 15 Years of Wireless Conference coming up next month. It's September 22, 23, and 24, and it will be in North Carolina. This conference will have speakers from around the world talking about the current and future state of Wi-Fi so that you can get an understanding of exactly what's going on in the industry and where it's heading. And the conference is worth continuing education credits as well for our existing CWNEs. So that's very important to know about. You can get more information at cwnp.com/wireless conference or by simply going to cwnp.com and then clicking on the wireless conference ad. Keep in mind the coupon code listed here on the screen. If you enter the coupon code of Wi-Fi 100, you'll get $100 off the cost of the attendance of that conference. So make sure you mark that on your calendar. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, today we're going to have a brief overview of Kali Linux and talk about what it is and why we might want to use it as a testing platform. Then we'll talk about pen testing itself. Why is penetration testing important and what role does it play? We'll then talk about the specific tools in Kali Linux that we might use, and we'll get a brief demonstration. Now, let me be very clear. We're only going to spend 30 to 40 minutes here today talking about this, and so clearly we're not going in depth into everything that Kali Linux can do for us from a penetration testing perspective, but it'll get you started thinking about how you might use it from a practical perspective as a pen testing solution, and from a certification prep perspective, how you might be able to use it in a lab scenario, things like that, in order to best understand security. And one of the things we always have to keep in mind, and I think it does get overlooked sometimes when people talk about Wi-Fi security, is that Wi-Fi is a network access tool or solution or point. And so the point that I'm making with that is that we can't really look at Wi-Fi and say, well, the only thing we have to worry about are Wi-Fi specific issues. The reality is we have all the concerns of wired network connections, and then additionally the concerns of, if it's not properly secured, how easily one might gain access to the wireless network. So the point that I'm making here is really simply just that we cannot look at Wi-Fi only from the perspective of Wi-Fi security. We have to think of it as general network security and then specific Wi-Fi issues as well. Therefore, the whole gamut of everything that is in Kali Linux is very useful for someone that's doing Wi-Fi pen testing. So let's talk a little bit about Kali Linux and what it is. Now, first of all, just so you know, it used to be called Backtrack. So if you really maybe just heard about it but didn't use it much, and you knew that there was this thing out there called Backtrack, that it was a pen testing distribution of Linux, and maybe you didn't touch it, well, Kali Linux is really the new version of that. So sometimes people wonder, can I use Backtrack versus Kali Linux? Well, you probably wouldn't want to use Backtrack today, simply because Kali Linux has the newer tools already in it, and it's the one that's being updated regularly so that you can get management updates and things like that to the system. But it is an open source Linux distribution based on Debian. And so what does that mean? Well, it means it's free. They say at the kali.org website, it's free and always will be free. So that's their main focus, right? Making sure that it's a Linux open source free distribution. It's designed specifically for pen testing, so built right into it. There are more than 300 different tools and utilities and applications that you can use in the pen testing process. So Kali Linux is Linux, but it's Linux with pen testing utilities already set in. And there are all kinds of different packages you can get of Kali Linux. So you can get a package of Kali Linux that is really just a slimmed down OS and not much else on it. And that one's about 1.5 gigabytes in size, all the way through to everything, including the kitchen sink, is thrown in, and that one's about 15 gigabytes in size. Okay, so there are many different distributions or packages of Kali Linux that you can get depending on what exactly it is that you're doing. Generally speaking, I recommend people start with the ISO downloadable DVD and then add on extra packages if they need them. You can use the apt-get command in the console to add extra Kali Linux packages if you want to add those in. It is regularly updated, and it works in many different ways. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, so I won't spend a lot of time on it now. You can do a bootable ISO. This is what we sometimes call a live distro. You can run it in a virtual machine, VMware, VirtualBox, things like that. You can install it natively on your computer, and you can even run it on ARM devices, things like the Raspberry Pi. So if you're a hobbyist and you like to play around with little nifty devices, then the Raspberry Pi is interesting. And there are others that have followed in the trail of Raspberry Pi, other hardware units that are more powerful now that are available as well, that you could run Kali Linux on. But you can actually put Kali Linux on a little Raspberry Pi, which is about, 3.5 by 2.5 inches or so device. You can put it in a case, which makes it a little bigger, plug in a little USB adapter, like a mini USB adapter, plug that in, and you can actually do wireless analysis and testing right from a tiny little device like that. Kali Linux, of course, is customizable. It is a full Linux distribution, so you can modify it, you can change it, you can make it do whatever you want it to do. So it's customizable. You can install full-blown applications on it, particularly if you're running it as your native operating system. So, for example, you can put full-fledged web browsers and Office-type applications like word processors and spreadsheets and all the rest. So you can use it as your base operating system as well. Generally speaking, though, I recommend having an installation of Kali that you use for security use, for testing and analysis and things like that. And then if you're going to run Kali Linux even as your main OS, then you probably want a different installation that you would use for that. So that's why myself, if I was going to use Kali Linux as my main OS, I would run still another version as a virtual machine that is going to be my testing installation. That way my testing environment maintains consistency. It doesn't change. I don't forget and remove something I shouldn't have removed or whatever. It has all of my software there that I want it to have. So penetration testing overview. If you're not real familiar with this concept, pen testing is really just the process by which a skilled professional evaluates the security of a network, system, or application. So pen testing is short for penetration testing. A pen tester is someone who performs penetration testing. And it's also sometimes called ethical hacking, due in large part to a certification that's out there called the Certified Ethical Hacker. And so ethical hacking and pen testing are sometimes used interchangeably. But the concept is that we are trying to find out if there are vulnerabilities in our network systems or other types of systems. So it validates policy implementation, making sure that your wireless networks and other systems have been implemented according to policy. That would be, of course, the policy of your organization. It communicates areas of weakness, so it's an opportunity for the IT group to let management and other people know these are some areas of weakness. Maybe we want to fix them, maybe we don't. The reality is a small business often doesn't want to fix an area of weakness because they measure that area of weakness against their likelihood of an attack being launched against them. And the reality they feel is that since the likelihood is extremely low that we would be attacked, we're actually not going to expend effort and money to circumvent or protect against the weakness. And it does circumvent potential attacks because you're basically doing what an attacker would do before the attacker does it. So in other words, you're going out and looking to see what the different vulnerabilities might be before an attacker does. And therefore, you can close up those holes before someone is able to exploit them. Now, the technical process varies for pen testing, but it could include information gathering. This simply means we're trying to find out everything we can about the environment, and often it's even done offline, at least not connected to the network. So, for example, we may do information gathering using internet websites. We may do information gathering using news websites and things like this, possibly dumpster diving, this kind of thing outside of the facility. So information gathering is just what can I find out about that organization that I want to target as an attack target and about their wireless networks. And then vulnerability analysis is, okay, now let's look at this network and see where vulnerabilities might exist. So for example, if we scan for Wi-Fi networks on premises and we find out that the actual vulnerability is that there are a whole bunch of access points that are not using any kind of authentication security, so there's no WEP, no WPA, no WPA2, nothing there at all, then obviously we have found a vulnerability and we could attempt to attack that or gain access to the network through that. And then when it comes to attacking, we found the vulnerabilities, now let's try to exploit them. And reporting is giving a summary of our results. Now, all of the tools you need to do all of this are built right into Kali Linux. And so you have most of what you need built in to actually get this done. Now, the question was asked by Mark, who puts out the Certified Ethical Hacker. It was already answered, but the answer is correct. It is EC Council that does that, and I believe they're still located in Arizona. So that is the organization that does the Certified Ethical Hacker, and they have other certifications as well, and they're all focused really in and around security specifically, and Wi-Fi is a portion of what they offer. For those going for the CWNE, as an example, the Certified Ethical Hacker would be one of the qualifying certifications that you would have to have, because to be a CWNE, you need a couple of certifications that are not CWNP certifications to show that you're well-rounded in the industry. Okay, so specific tools to use that are built in. There are several different tools built in. There are tools that are not built in you can add on, but we're going to focus on what's in there. For example, Kismet can be used. It is kind of like a Wi-Fi finder. So Kismet can be used to show you the wireless networks, and we'll take a look at that a little bit later. The Airmon NG suite. This is the suite of tools that lets you capture packets. It lets you find the networks that are available. It lets you do packet injection, meaning that you're going to transmit different types of 802.11 frames and so forth. We have built in just to Linux itself ifconfig and iwconfig that we use to do some configuration of our interfaces. Wireshark, of course, is built in so that we can do protocol analysis. We'll not spend a lot of time really explaining that today because we did talk about protocol analysis in Kali Linux earlier in the week, but we will use it to take a look at some beacon frames and see what they reveal to us. Nmap, which is a GUI interface for Nmap, is built into Kali Linux, and this is a scanner, a network scanner that will go out and scan and look for open ports and therefore services and try to identify services and things like that. We'll take a look at that. And then just the Kali Linux menu. So on the application menu in Kali Linux, you have a menu that's actually structured in a common sequence that you might go through in order to do penetration testing. And then one of the things they've added in the last few years is a top 10 list of things that people often want to use within the interface. So these are some specific tools that you might use within Kali Linux in order to do your pen testing. So let's go ahead and take a look at some demonstration here. Okay, so what I'm going to do first of all is show you how to get Kismet working within Kali Linux. And so as you can see, I'm running Kali Linux in a virtual machine within VMware Workstation. I'm going to go ahead and go full screen, so Kali Linux will take up our screen. What we're going to look at then, first of all, is getting Kismet up and running. And we need to start by going to our console and making sure that our wireless adapter is working. So the first thing I'm going to do is switch over to run as root so that I can pretty well do anything I want to do without having to use sudo commands. And so what I want to do is take a look at IWconfig and see if it sees my wireless network, and it does. So we can see right here is my wireless network adapter. Now the network adapter that I'm using today is the Hawking HD45U. It is a 3x3x3 USB 3 adapter that works with protocol analysis here really well, and it also supports a lot of the protocol analyzers like ComView for Wi-Fi can use it, OmniPeak can use it, things like that as far as Windows-based protocol analyzers go. Now, one of the things that I want to do here is get rid of a few of these adapters. What is a model again? The model of adapter, I'm sorry, it's just the model number that I'm using, and it is the product ID number, it's sometimes also called. So it's an Edimax HD45U. I'm sorry, it's not an Edimax, it's a Hawking. I often misstate that. It's a Hawking HD45U. And the reason I often misstate it is because it is the exact same as an Edimax adapter. So there's an Edimax adapter that is identical, literally the same hardware, it's just rebranded as Hawking, and so it's a lot less expensive. So the Hawking HD45U is about $40 at Amazon, and you can use it for protocol analysis. Now, a couple things that I want to do here. First of all, I'm going to run airmon ng and stop mon0 just so we can see the process of creating it. And IWconfig back in here again. And basically then what we've got here is the ability to create our monitoring interfaces. So for example, you can put an interface directly into monitor mode if you want to. So you can say something like ifconfig and then WLAN2 down. Now if we type IWconfig, you'll see it's still there. It doesn't go away, but it's not up and running. And I can say IWconfig WLAN2 mode monitor, and that puts it into monitor mode. So I can actually use it in that way, and then say ifconfig WLAN2 up. And so what that does is it forces that adapter to be in monitor mode, so that, for example, I could type aerodump ng WLAN2 and actually have it go out and scan my networks and show me the networks that are available. Okay, I'll press Control-C here to exit. The point is that IWconfig, ifconfig, we use them a lot for different things. And so the big point right now is to know that my WLAN2 is in monitor mode and that WLAN2 is up. And so what I'm going to do now is run Kismet. And it's telling me it's running as root, common warning, I'm not worried about that. I do want to start the Kismet server, so I'll hit enter for yes. And I'm not going to show the server console just to keep it out of the way, so I'll deselect show console and click on start. Now that starts up the server, but it's going to come back and say I don't really see any sources. In other words, it's not actually going to start showing me anything. So it says it started with no sources defined, and I'm going to say yes, I want to add a source, so I'll hit enter. And the source is just WLAN2. I'll give it a name just for reference purposes. And we'll add that. And because it was in monitor mode already, we can see it's beginning to capture information. So it's found 2 networks. It has retrieved 26 different packets. And so we're seeing that information coming in from the environment. Now, it is important to note that the device will have to switch from one band to another band and scan the different networks, and it can take it a few seconds to go out and find everything. And so what we've seen is at this point it has found networks on channel 1, channel 161, channel 11, and channel 36. We have a hidden SSID there on channel 11, and we'll see why here in a little bit. So the point is that it can find these networks very quickly, and you'll notice, for example, if I go to my Linksys network here, you can see it's encrypted with WPA, and we can see the BSSID and all of that. If I double click it, it will take me in and show me more detail about the network. So I can come in and see, for example, the signal strength of the beacon, negative 45 dBm. I can see it's using WPA, PSK, AES, CCM, so I know it's WPA2 effectively. And so all of that information is shown to me. I can see the channel that it's on, and I see the manufacturer, which is, remember, the manufacturer is based on the MAC address. So there's a MAC address database that brings together all of the different manufacturers based on their MAC address. The first 3 fields here in the MAC address, which happens to be the BSSID of the access point, but the first 3 fields here would be the identifier of the organization. It's the organizational unit identifier. And so that is showing me Belkin, and this is a Linksys device, but remember, Belkin is the owner of Linksys now. We talked about that earlier in the week. So we can actually see more information by coming into it, and then we can go and close this window and go back out and see the other networks. Now, there's all kinds of things you can do as far as your sorting and what you want to actually view. Do you want to see, for example, clients as well, if there are any clients? So you can enable that and see those clients. So there are several things that you can actually go out and do, and the information that you can see. But the first thing to note here with this tool is this is one of the tools in Kali Linux and in Linux in general available that you can use for pen testing, because the first thing you need to do is find the wireless networks. So I'm just going to go ahead and exit Kismet at this point. And yes, I'll kill the server as it exits. So that's Kismet. Now, one of the things that we noticed in Kismet is that there is an access point that has a hidden SSID. Now, this is one of those common things that people think is a secure solution. They think that not broadcasting the SSID gives you security on your wireless LAN, but it doesn't, and we're going to show why that is right now. Now, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to airmon ng, and I'm going to start WLAN 2. So I'm basically starting a monitor mode on Mon 0, and I just do it because Mon 0 is nice and easy to work with. Now, one of the things that I can do then is go into aerodump-ng Mon 0 and just hit enter. And it will go through and scan for these networks, because what I want to do is I want to get onto my screen here the BSSID of that open hidden SSID network. Okay, so there it is. Let's go ahead and resize our console screen here a little bit so you can see it. And so it's just saying length 14. It just doesn't know what the SSID is. So it's there, but it does not know what it is. What we do know is that it's on channel 11. So I know there's a network on channel 11, and I know that it's configured to not broadcast the SSID. And that is, again, a common thing that is done. So for example, if we go into our browser and go to the IP address of that particular access point, I'll just show you the interface and that it is set up with a hidden SSID. So here it is. This is the Linksys WRT 1900 AC. And if we go to wireless, 2.4 gigahertz, notice right down here, it says broadcast disabled. And so our broadcasting is disabled, and that is what's causing it to not show the broadcast of the SSID out here in the console interface. So what we want to do is figure out, well, okay, it's not broadcasting. How do I get that SSID? Well, the first thing I want to do is do an IWconfig on Mon 0 and set it to channel 11, because we already know that channel 11 is the channel, right? And now I'm going to go into Wireshark. And here in Wireshark, I'm going to select Mon 0 and start my capture. And I'm getting a lot of beacon frames, and we'll just go ahead and stop it. Okay, so we can already see that we've got these beacon frames that are coming down. Let's look at one of them. And what I want you to notice is that when we go into the tagged parameters right here for the SSID, in the frame itself, we see it just says truncated in Wireshark. There is no SSID there. So that's what it means to have a hidden SSID or not be broadcasting the SSID. But the reality is that the SSID is out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new capture, and then I'm going to go and quickly have a client connect to that access point. And you'll see how we can find the SSID. So I'm going to go ahead and click on continue. And now that I've connected, I'll go ahead and stop. So let's scroll back through here and see what we can find. So again, early on we had all of our beacon frames. And then if we come down just a little way, we will see eventually right here. See that probe request? It's going from a client to the access point. So its source is Netgear, and it's broadcasting out this probe request. In 802.11 communications, the probe request is used to tell an access point I want to connect. So it is trying to find that Linksys 1900-24. And guess who responds? That MAC address. So if we go into this frame, what we'll see is that this is a probe response, and the probe response is from B4750E59. Does that sound familiar? Let's go take a look. B4750E59, right there. Okay, so we're seeing that that is indeed the one that is this hidden SSID right here. So I know immediately that the SSID now is Linksys 1900-24. That's the SSID. Was that hard to do? Not with the right tools. And so the point is that hiding SSIDs is simply not a security solution at all. It does not give you security. Now, you might hide SSIDs for management purposes, but I would discourage the thinking that there's any security at all provided by hiding SSIDs or by not broadcasting the SSID. Instead, if you're going to think of it as anything, just think of it as you are just managing access to it, making it so that, you know, your mother-in-law comes in, she's not going to see the wireless LAN, right? But if your mother-in-law happens to be a hacker, she's going to be able to find it. Okay, so that's the important thing to keep in mind. We'll go ahead and quit out of Wireshark. And so we've seen a couple things. We've seen how to find wireless networks. We have seen how to find hidden SSIDs if they're out there. Now, I just want to mention that I'm not actually going to crack WPA. I'm not going to crack WEP because there are just so many tutorials all over YouTube and the internet for that. It's very easy to find. So I'm not going to go through that process here today. I want to focus on showing you now a couple of things that are specifically here in Kali Linux that would be advantageous to you. But before I get to that, I do want to show you one thing that's a little more modern issue. And that is that WPS, Wi-Fi protected setup, introduces some new vulnerabilities depending on the version of WPS that's being used. Wi-Fi protected setup is the one where you go to your AP, you push the button, and then you go to your client and either push the button or click the software, and they automatically set up security that is unique among those two devices, the client and the AP. So by the sounds of it, it's good and secure, right? But the reality is that there's more to it than that. And so the important thing to keep in mind is that there's a tool called Reaver, R-E-A-V-E-R, that is built right into Kali Linux that is used to do some hacking against WPS. But what I want to show you right now is the command you use in order to find out if there are any devices out there that are indeed vulnerable. So if I type wash -I mon0 ignore FCS, frame check sequence, and I'm going to scan 5 gigahertz just because I know that there's one there. So -S is scan, and if you don't put in the -5, it would by default just scan 2.4. But because I've put in the -5, it's scanning the 5 gigahertz bands. So I'll hit enter on that. And what it's going to do is it's going to go out and try to find out if there are any networks out there that could be vulnerable to the Reaver attack. And what I want you to notice is that a brand new device right here, the Linksys WRT 1900 AC. This device, you couldn't even buy it 6 or 8 months ago. So a new device is running WPS version 1 and is potentially vulnerable to the Reaver attack. So what this wash command does, it works with Reaver, and it just goes out and it takes a look at the networks to see if there are any that would be vulnerable. And just pressing Control-C gets you out of it. And again, if I would leave out the -5, I would just be scanning 2.4 gigahertz, and my environment doesn't actually have any there, so nothing's coming up. So I'm just going to press Control-C to get out of there. But the point is that wash will tell you if it's there. Now, the reason I'm not going to run Reaver right now is just because it can take it a few hours to go through the process of hacking and getting into that system. So, but the point is still that it works against WPS and the way WPS actually does its work. So, very important to know about that. Other tools to know about, like Air Replay I mentioned, part of the Airmon NG suite, allows you to do packet injection. MAC Changer, MAC Changer, allows you to change your MAC address, basically. So if someone is doing MAC filtering for security, we can change the MAC address and go from there. Okay. Now, what I want to do at this point then is talk to you about another tool. I'm going to close this down, and that is Nmap. Now, I've already launched this ahead of time, and there's a simple reason for it. Notice it says right here that we've got 1 hour and 12 minutes remaining, and then here we've got 35 minutes remaining. The point is this can take quite a while to run what I've done, which is an intense scan plus UDP. So what I've done here is I've actually scanned the Linksys is what it is. It's the Linksys WRT 1900 AC. So I've scanned it to find out what ports are open and so forth. So the first thing to know is Nmap is available in Windows as well as Linux, Unix. Nmap, built into Kali Linux by default, is a network mapper, but it's more important that it's a network scanner. So it goes out, scans the devices on the network. Now, this is a scan from the wired side. So this is actually the Ethernet port on that Linksys device. This is a scan from the wired side. And it's an intense scan, which means that it's really trying to do banner grabbing and so forth in order to locate the different actual service names for services that might be running. So you can see, for example, that it discovered certain ports and then it did the intensive scanning. It's doing OS detection attempts and so forth. And then if we get down toward the end, we get our report. So right here, here's where our reporting really begins. And you will notice that it's using light TPD, or LIG-HTTP daemon is what it is. I always say light TPD, but it's an HTTP server. We can see it's running on port 80 as well as port 443. So, well, what good would that do me? Well, I could actually take that information right there, copy it, and go out to my search engine and do a search for vulnerabilities related to that. So once I found it, I can go and see if I can find any kind of vulnerabilities. It looks like there's an SQL injection and path traversal attack against it. And so I could click on that and go learn more about that. Here I have my particular CVEs that are going to be focused on that particular version. Okay, so the point is that finding out the different services that are on it, and this is what some of that intensive scanning was doing, banner grabbing, things like that, to get this information. I can then use that knowledge to go and find out what vulnerabilities might be there that I can use as an attack against it. So this is part of the information gathering, the network scanning, and then vulnerability attacks would be to try to take advantage of vulnerabilities that are known. And that's where I might use another tool that's built in here. If you go to Applications, Kali Linux, you've got your different vulnerability analysis tools. You can see you've got various scanners and things like that. But if you go down to your different attacks or exploitation tools, right here, Metasploit, one of the major ones. So you could use Metasploit with a known vulnerability, and there may even be a script already for it that can be used to try to attack this device. Now, why am I trying to attack this device? Well, remember, this is a wireless access point. So if I can find a way to get into its admin interface or something like that, then I can use that access in order to open up the Wi-Fi side so that I can use Wi-Fi to get onto the network and do any other attacks I might want. You can see there's some routing software running on here. Light TPD is also running on port 10,000. There's a portable software development kit for universal plug-and-play devices. So this device supports universal plug-and-play, and it's running it on 49152. So we can actually see that right there, and we could again search for vulnerabilities in relation to that. And so you can actually see all of this information. It did an OS scan, didn't do a really good job of figuring it out in detail, but we know it's a Linux kernel. So we did find that out. Some kind of embedded Linux is running on that device. So all of this information came from just having this software scan the device in order to locate what services might be running on it, what ports might be open on it, and that kind of thing. This is also the kind of thing you can do for a whole network. So one of the things you can do is you can target a network instead of individual devices, and you can go through in that route. You can also, once you've scanned several devices, you can go into services, and then you can actually see any devices that might be running, say HTTP or Telnet or something like that. You can see any of the devices that might be running it, and then using that knowledge, you can pick your targets on the network to gain access to them. Now, the last thing I want to show you here is the Kali Linux menu. So if you go to Applications and then take a look at the Kali Linux menu, first you have your top 10 security tools, and right there at the top, of course, AirCrack NG, it helps that it starts with an A. Then we have other tools also that are used, and of course, tools at the top right here, these are your primary Wi-Fi cracking and testing tools, but then these other tools like the Metasploit framework, very important, Nmap, very important, and Wireshark. So all of these are going to play roles when you're doing Wi-Fi analysis. In your information gathering, you can see there's all kinds of information here for DNS analysis, identification of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems they might be running, looking for live hosts. So maybe you're just trying to find out what hosts are alive out there on the network with things like rping for the local LAN or ping for the entire network. Network scanners, and it shows you several options that are there. OS fingerprinting tools. And then your route analysis and SMTP analysis and traffic analysis. So a lot of things in there in information gathering. Then your vulnerability analysis tools. So you've gathered information. Now you want to know in what ways some of these systems you've located might be vulnerable. And then there are specific attacks for different things. Web applications, password attacks, wireless attacks, which is not just 802.11. We see all of those there. But we also have Bluetooth, other wireless tools like Zigbee, things of that sort, RFID, near-field communication, and so on. Exploitation tools, sniffing and spoofing. Then, okay, you've gotten access. So by this point, going through the first 7 sections of the menu, the assumption is you've maintained some kind of access. So now you've got different back doors that you can install. And then you've got reverse engineering tools, stress testing tools, hardware hacking tools, and your forensics analysis. Of course, the last step we talked about would be reporting. So there's built-in documentation tools for reporting what you learn as you go through this process. So again, that's the main reason Kali Linux was developed. And I just wanted to kind of show you that menu. And you can kind of see if you look at the menu, it walks you through in a lot of ways the sequence that you might go through to actually do a penetration testing exercise.